convoy of black SUVs rolled into a freezing Chicago alley, carrying the most powerful men in the city's underworld, kings of a shadow empire, and not one of them understood that they had just driven straight into a death trap. Snipers lay in wait on the rooftops, motionless as winter stone. A bomb ticked inside a dumpster, patient and precise, counting down in the dark. And while the whole world stepped over a homeless girl shivering in the corner as if she didn't exist, she was the only one who heard what everyone else missed. She was blind, she was starving, she was forgotten, and yet she caught the faint, unnatural rhythm of the trap before any of them did. Her scream that night was not just fear spilling into the cold air, it was a warning, raw and desperate, and it didn't just save 10 lives. It set off a chain reaction that exposed a 19-year conspiracy worth $80 million. This is the unbelievable true story of how an invisible girl saved the most dangerous men in Chicago and reclaimed the life that had been stolen from her. If this story moved you, hit the like button and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Then subscribe and turn on the bell so you never miss our next incredible story. And I'll see you in the next one. Stop! There's a bomb! Run! The scream tore through Chicago's frozen night. 10 men in expensive suits turned in unison toward the darkest corner of the alley. There, a thin, ragged girl stood with her arm outstretched, pointing straight at a blue industrial dumpster, her eyes fixed on nothing at all, yet her trembling finger aimed in a direction so exact it was terrifying. Harrison Stone Blackwell didn't ask questions. He didn't doubt. 20 years of surviving the underworld had taught him a costly lesson. When instinct speaks, you move first, and you ask later. And right now, every sense in his body was shouting the same word: danger. He lunged toward the girl like a fired bullet. In a split second, his solid arm locked around her frail frame, yanking her down, rolling them both behind a large concrete block beside the restaurant's back door. Boom. The world detonated. A massive fireball swallowed the dumpster and turned it into thousands of razor-sharp shards of metal that flew in every direction. Glass shattered like hail. Bricks from the opposite wall blasted outward like artillery. The pressure of the explosion shoved the air away, forming an invisible wave that slammed into the chests of anyone still standing. Then gunfire cracked from the rooftops. Ambush! Pierce shouted from somewhere inside the smoke. Blackwell's men didn't panic. They were trained for moments like this. Jet rolled behind the SUV, drew his gun, and fired back toward the roofline. Knox took cover behind a concrete pillar, his eyes sweeping fast, hunting for the next threat. Tate and Reese moved in formation, covering Stone's flank. The return fire snapped hard in the night. One shooter on the roof took a hit, staggered, then tumbled down with a sickening thud. 2 others bolted in fear and vanished into the dark. And then there was silence. Gunpowder smoke tangled with the smoke rising from the wreckage, forming a lethal fog that blanketed the alley. Stone lay over the girl, a living shield, protecting her from every flying fragment. He could feel each wild beat of her heart beneath the torn fabric of her clothes, each ragged breath spilling warm against his throat. "On the roof," the girl whispered, her voice weak but strangely certain. "Left side. There's still one." His heart is beating very fast. Stone lifted his head, eyes narrowing toward the direction she indicated. He couldn't see anything through darkness and smoke. "Reese," he ordered, his voice low and cold. "Left roof. Check it." Reese nodded and moved like a shadow toward the fire escape. 2 minutes later, a dry, blunt gunshot sounded, followed by Reese's voice over the radio. "Confirmed. 1 shooter. Handled." Stone rose slowly and pulled the girl up with him. Under the flicker of the streetlight, he truly saw her for the first time. She was so thin her shoulder bones pushed up beneath a fragile layer of cloth. Her dark brown hair was tangled and caked with grime. The smell of the street clung to her like an invisible coat, but what stopped him cold were her eyes. Those eyes stared into emptiness, never focusing on anything at all. She was blind. A blind girl had just saved 10 men by hearing what no one else could see. "Who are you?" Stone asked, his voice rough with smoke. The girl didn't look at him. She couldn't, but she turned her head toward his voice, precise to the centimeter, as if her ears could see straight through the dark. "I'm just someone no one ever bothers to see." Pierce appeared at Stone's side, his face speckled with dust and streaked with blood from a scrape across his forehead. His voice was tight as he reported, 2 with minor injuries. Jet took glass shards to the arm. Knox has ear trauma from being too close to the blast, but no one's dead. He paused. flicking a glance at the blind girl trembling beside Stone. Completely because of her. Pierce lowered his voice, just enough that only Stone could hear. Caruso's people. It was planned down to the detail. A bomb. Snipers in position. Timing that precise. There has to be a mole in our ranks. Stone nodded slowly, but his eyes never left the girl. She stood there. All sharp angles and fragile bones, thin as a dead branch. Her arms wrapped around herself to fight the skin-cutting cold of a Chicago night. She'd just saved 10 men. Yet she looked so breakable that a hard wind could have carried her off. "Bring her to the penthouse," Stone ordered. Ellie lifted her head, her blind eyes turning toward his voice. "No, I don't want to be involved. Let me go." Her voice was rough, maybe from going too long without speaking to anyone. "I was only here by accident. I don't know anything about you, and I don't want to." Stone stepped in front of her, close enough that she could feel the warmth coming off his body. "You just saved 10 of my men," he said, his voice steel cold but not cruel. "You're involved already. And whoever just hit us, they won't leave any witness alive. Not even a homeless girl they think no one cares about." Ellie went quiet. She knew he was right. 9 years on the street had taught her that the underworld never leaves loose ends, and she, even by accident, had become one. The black SUV glided through Chicago's night streets, smooth and silent. Ellie sat rigid on the leather seat, fingers clenched around the torn edge of her shirt until her knuckles turned white. She could feel Stone's gaze from the seat across from her. It wasn't pity. It wasn't contempt. It was the look of a man trying to solve a puzzle. The car stopped. A door opened, and Ellie stepped into a world that didn't belong to her. She couldn't see it, but every other sense inside her flared to life. The scent of high-end Italian leather from the sofas. The clean, deep smell of oak from the floors. Air so pure she could feel each molecule flooding her lungs. No dust, no damp rot. None of the garbage stench of the alleys where she'd slept for 9 years. Marble was cold beneath her bare feet, polished smooth as silk. She reached for a wall and felt paint so even it seemed to disappear under her fingertips. Then she began to move. Slowly, one measured step at a time. Her head tilted slightly as she listened to the echo of her own footsteps. She was drawing the room inside her mind, measuring distance with sound, finding furniture by the way the air shifted around it. Stone stood still and watched. He'd never seen anyone move like that. She was blind, but she wasn't helpless. "What's your name?" he asked. Ellie stopped. The silence stretched so long Stone thought she wouldn't answer. That name had been buried for 9 years, since the day she walked out of the orphanage with empty hands and a shattered heart. She'd tried to forget it, tried to press it down with every memory of the life she'd had before. But tonight, for the first time in 9 years, someone was asking her who she was. "At last," she replied, her voice as if she were waking a ghost from the dead. "Eleanor. Eleanor Sinclair." Sinclair. The name hit Stone so hard he went still, as if someone had driven a fist straight into his chest. He wasn't a man who startled easily, but this name, a name anyone who'd lived in Chicago long enough knew by heart, had just come from the mouth of a blind homeless girl inside his penthouse. The Sinclair family had once been one of Chicago's largest real estate dynasties. They owned dozens of high-rises, shopping centers, and luxury residential developments stretching across the city. 19 years ago, the news of a catastrophic car accident that took the lives of the entire Sinclair family had sent shockwaves through the upper class. The press ran the story for weeks. Their funeral drew hundreds, from politicians to business titans. And then, like every other tragedy, the story slowly sank into forgetting. But standing in front of Stone now was a ghost, a living ghost. "Knox," Stone said into the phone, his voice steady even as something inside him churned and rose. "I need you to dig into this immediately. The Sinclair family, the accident 19 years ago, everything you can find." He ended the call and looked back at Ellie. She was sitting on the leather sofa, her thin legs pulled up, her arms wrapped around her knees like a child trying to make herself small enough to survive. Her blind eyes faced the windows, where the city lights spilled in and painted soft, blurry bands across a world she would never see. "Tell me," Stone said, his tone easing just a fraction. "What happened that night?" Ellie was silent for a long time. When she finally spoke, her voice sounded like it was coming from somewhere far away, somewhere deep, where the most painful memories were buried and left to rot. "I was 8 years old," she began. flat and steady, as if she were telling the story of someone else's life. We were driving home after dinner at my mother's favorite restaurant. I was in the back seat, holding the teddy bear my father had just bought me. My mother was singing along to the song on the radio. My father was laughing. She stopped and took a deep breath. Then everything happened so fast. The scream of brakes, the impact, the car rolling. I remember being thrown around inside like a doll. Then the smell of gasoline. Then fire. Her voice started to shake. I heard my mother calling my name. Eleanor, Eleanor. Then it stopped. I tried to answer, but smoke filled my lungs. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't see. The heat was so intense it felt like my skin was melting. Then she paused, and when she spoke again, her voice went so cold it raised gooseflesh on Stone's arms. But I heard them. Outside the car. Someone was standing there, watching us burn. She turned her head toward Stone, her blind eyes fixed on him as if they could see straight through bone and lie. One voice asked, "Are you sure no one survived?" And another voice answered, "There's a child, but she won't make it through the night." The room sank into a heavy, crushing silence. "I never forgot that voice," Ellie said, her words set like stone, low, smooth, like honey poured over a blade. 19 years. Every night, I hear it again in my nightmares. Every night, I wake up with the smell of smoke and my mother calling my name. Stone's phone vibrated. Knox. "I found it," Knox said, urgent. Eleanor Sinclair, 8 years old, declared dead with her parents in the accident. But here's the interesting part. No child's body was ever recovered. They assumed she was completely burned. Knox went on. The Sinclair assets, estimated at $80 million, were assigned to the guardian named in the will, a lawyer named Franklin Crawford. And Stone, you're not going to believe this. Franklin Crawford is now a federal judge, one of the most powerful men in Chicago. Stone ended the call, and his gaze moved back to Ellie, slow and deliberate. She was still there, curled into herself on the expensive leather sofa. Thin, ragged, her blind eyes staring into nothing. $80 million, 19 years lost to the streets. A federal judge holding her inheritance. She wasn't just a homeless girl. She was the heir to an empire that had been stolen. 1 hour later, the conference room at the top of the penthouse was filled with grim faces. Pierce, Jet, Knox, Reese, Tate. Every one of Stone's closest men was there. The air felt heavy, like the stillness before a storm breaks. Pierce stood in front of the large screen, presenting what they had gathered. "Tonight's ambush was too precise," he said, his voice drawn tight as wire. "They knew exactly when we'd arrive. They knew we'd use the back entrance. The bomb was placed in the perfect position to cause maximum damage. This wasn't random. There's a mole inside our ranks." He shifted to a photograph of a young man, arrogant-faced, cold-eyed. "The trail leads to Nico Caruso, Bruno Caruso's son. Hot-tempered, reckless, eager to prove himself to his father." Pierce paused and shook his head. "But there's a problem. Nico Caruso isn't smart enough to plan something this flawless. He's the type who acts first and thinks later. Tonight required calculation, patience, and resources Nico doesn't have. There's someone behind him, someone pulling the strings." The room went silent. Then Pierce turned to Stone, his gaze cautious. "Stone, I need to ask straight. Who is that girl? Why are we putting resources into her?" No one spoke, but Stone could feel the agreement in the other's eyes. Pierce went on. "We're at war with Caruso. That's priority 1. The Sinclair matter is civil, an inheritance dispute. It's got nothing to do with us. We're not cops, we're not lawyers, and we sure as hell aren't a charity." The silence deepened. Every eye in the room shifted to Stone, waiting for the answer from the man at the head of the table. Stone didn't respond immediately. He rose and walked slowly toward the towering glass wall overlooking Chicago. The city stretched beneath him like a carpet of light, millions of lamps flickering in the dark. Somewhere out there were cold alleys and forgotten corners, where people like Ellie curled in on themselves against the cold and the indifference of the world. "She saved 10 of our men," Stone said at last, his voice low and steady, while this entire city stepped over her like she was trash. No one saw her. No one cared if she lived or died. But she still screamed a warning. She still saved strangers. He turned back, steel-gray eyes sweeping across every face in the room. "That's why." Then he moved to the table and braced both hands against the oak surface. And I've got a feeling. Crawford isn't just a thief. A federal judge doesn't get the resources to bury a murder for 19 years without help. He's got allies. He's got protection in the underworld. Stone looked at Knox. What did you find between Crawford and Caruso? Knox's fingers flew across the keyboard as the screen filled with documents and financial records. I dug into the Sinclair accident report from 19 years ago, Knox said, his voice edged with urgency. And I found this. The brake lines were cut. Not damaged. Cut on purpose. This wasn't an accident. It was murder. He switched screens, revealing a tangled web of shell companies and transactions. There's more. Franklin Crawford has had tight financial ties to Bruno Caruso for 15 years. Money from the Sinclair estate was laundered through shell corporations and funneled straight into Caruso's empire. Crawford provided capital and legal cover. Caruso provided muscle and protection. They're partners. The room seemed to lose its air. Every piece began locking into place. Pierce stood silent for a long moment, absorbing it all. Then he nodded slowly, the reluctance fading from his face. Then we hunt them both. Stone turned toward the conference room door. There, in the dim hallway, Ellie stood listening. She couldn't see him, but somehow she knew he was looking at her. Her head tilted slightly in his direction, her ears gathering every sound. We'll find who did this to you, Stone said, his voice carrying through the stillness. That's a promise. 1 week passed. 7 days that, for Ellie, brought back things she'd believed were gone forever. For the first time in 9 years, she slept in a real bed, beneath soft sheets and a blanket that covered her completely. For the first time in 9 years, she ate 3 meals a day instead of fighting over scraps from dumpsters or standing in church lines for a bowl of thin soup. For the first time in 9 years, she stood under hot water and felt the steady warmth run over skin that had grown used to the knife-sharp cold of Chicago streets. At first, the members of the syndicate looked at her with suspicion and curiosity. A blind homeless girl appearing in the penthouse of a crime lord wasn't an everyday occurrence, but slowly, her quiet presence became familiar, as natural to the apartment as the furniture and the light. Tate was the first to break the invisible wall between Ellie and the others. He was 24, the youngest of the group, still carrying a kind of earnest energy the underworld hadn't yet carved away. Every day he brought a tray of food to Ellie's room, knocked gently, and waited. On the first day, she refused. I don't need pity, she said, her voice hard as stone. I survived 9 years on the street without anyone's help. Tate didn't waver. This isn't pity, he replied, deadly serious. It's Stone's order. And trust me, I don't argue with Stone. He's got a look that can freeze a man where he stands. Something in the way Tate said it made Ellie let out a small laugh. The sound slipped from her before she could stop it. So unfamiliar she almost didn't recognize it as her own. She'd forgotten what it felt like to laugh. Then there was Jet. He was Stone's head of security, built like a bear and nearly 6.5 feet tall. Yet he carried eyes that were strangely gentle. One afternoon he brought his 6-year-old daughter, Lily, to the penthouse for a visit. Lily was a tiny whirlwind of energy and endless curiosity. When she saw Ellie sitting by the window, she ran straight toward her, without the hesitation adults often showed around disability. What do you see? Lily asked, her voice bright and innocent. Is it black? Like when I close my eyes? Ellie turned toward the small voice, a faint smile brushing her lips. It's not black, little one. I see with my ears. With your ears? Lily sounded confused. How can you see with your ears? I hear everything, Ellie explained softly. I hear your footsteps, small and quick like a rabbit. I hear your heart beating, excited and happy. And you laugh like wind chimes. Lily burst into giggles, the clear sound filling the room. Then she grabbed Ellie's hand and tugged her to her feet. I'll show you the penthouse. I'll tell you about everything. Jet started to stop his daughter, but Ellie was already standing, letting the tiny hand guide her. She didn't need direction. She'd mapped this apartment in her mind long ago. But the feeling of a child holding her hand, of being trusted and cared for without calculation, was something she'd nearly forgotten existed. Stone came home earlier than usual that afternoon. He paused in the doorway and didn't step inside, simply stood there watching. Lily was leading Ellie around the living room, pointing at objects and describing them in the earnest language of a 6-year-old. Ellie listened, nodding, smiling now and then. Stone's gaze softened, just slightly. It happened so rarely that Pierce, standing behind him, had to blink twice to make sure he wasn't imagining it. That night, for the first time in 9 years of drifting, Ellie didn't dream of fire. She didn't hear her mother calling her name and then falling silent. She didn't dream at all. There was only the familiar darkness, gentle and still, and a strange sensation she had almost forgotten was possible. Safety. The peace didn't last. News travels through the underworld faster than light, and it wasn't long before Bruno Caruso learned about Ellie, the blind girl who'd ruined his perfect ambush. The blind girl who'd saved 10 men he intended to bury beneath rubble, and now that girl was inside his enemy's stronghold. A living witness who could tie him to attempted murder. Caruso couldn't allow that. That afternoon, Jet drove out to buy ice cream for Lily. She'd been pleading all morning, and Jet, a man large enough to make enemies tremble, was entirely defenseless against his daughter's shining eyes. He parked outside their usual grocery store, shut off the engine, and had just reached for the door when a black van tore past. The driver's side window exploded inward. Jet ducked on instinct, reaching for the gun beneath his seat, but no shots followed, only the roar of the van's engine fading into traffic. When Jet lifted his head, he saw a folded piece of paper lying among the shattered glass. Inside was a single handwritten line: "Return the girl, or next time it won't be a warning." 15 minutes later, Stone had called an emergency meeting in the penthouse. The note lay on the table like a declaration of war. The air in the room was tight enough to choke on. "They're threatening us," Pierce said, anger vibrating in his voice. In broad daylight, on a crowded street, Caruso's sending a message. Stone nodded, his face carved from ice, though his steel-gray eyes burned low and hot. "We move Ellie somewhere safer. The estate outside the city. We control every entrance and exit there. This place carries too much risk." He turned to Ellie, who stood quietly in the corner, listening to everything. "You'll be relocated tonight." "No." A single word, but it cut through the discussion like a blade. Every head turned toward her. She stepped forward, bare feet moving slowly across the marble floor. "I'm not running anymore," she said, her voice strangely calm. Stone rose and faced her. "This isn't stubborn pride. You're in danger. These men don't play games. They'll kill you without hesitation." Ellie didn't step back. She stood there, facing the direction of his voice, her blind eyes fixed ahead as if she could see straight through him. "I have run," she said, her voice beginning to tremble. Not from fear, but from emotion, held tight for 9 long years. 9 years. Since the day I walked out of that orphanage with nothing, I ran from one street corner to another. I ran every time someone stronger came near me. I ran when drunk men tried to drag me into alleys. I ran when street gangs pushed me off their territory. I ran and ran and ran. She drew in a slow breath, and it didn't change anything. I was still blind, still homeless, still someone no one bothered to see. Running never solves anything. It only delays what's coming. Stone studied her, eyes narrowing. "You can't face them. You can't even see your enemy." Ellie lifted her chin toward him, and when she spoke, her voice was so steady the temperature in the room seemed to drop. "I don't need to see. I only need to hear." Silence settled heavy over the room. Stone looked at her, truly looked at her. Not as a victim to shield. She was thin enough that her shoulder bones pressed sharp beneath her shirt. She was blind, unable to see the face of the man standing in front of her. She'd been abandoned by the world for 19 years. Yet her shoulders were straight, her chin was high, and in her voice was something money couldn't buy and power couldn't grant. Resilience. For the first time, Stone didn't look at her with pity. He looked at her with respect. After the confrontation with Ellie, Stone spent the entire night thinking. This girl wasn't like anyone he'd ever known. Blind, physically fragile, yet possessed of a will forged from steel and ears that could catch what the rest of the world ignored. And sometime before dawn, he understood something that shifted the ground beneath his feet. She wasn't a burden to shield. She was a weapon. The next morning, Stone called a meeting with his inner circle. This time, Ellie sat beside him, no longer standing in the corner like an outsider. "We're changing strategy," Stone began, his voice decisive. "Instead of defending, we strike. Target, Franklin Crawford." He turned toward Ellie. "You said you never forgot the voice from that night. The man who ordered your parents killed. If Crawford is that man, can you recognize him?" Ellie nodded slowly. 19 years. Every night I've heard that voice in my nightmares. I'd know it anywhere. under any circumstance. Good. Stone looked to Knox. Here's the plan. We lure Crawford into appearing somewhere public, somewhere Ellie can hear him speak. If she confirms it's the same voice from 19 years ago, we'll have grounds to dig deeper. Knox, can you leak information onto the dark web that Eleanor Sinclair is alive? Knox nodded, his fingers already moving across his laptop keyboard. Easy. I'll seed a few rumors, fabricate some convincing fragments, make sure it reaches Crawford. A federal judge like him has people monitoring anything tied to his past. When he hears Eleanor Sinclair might be alive, he'll panic. And when men like him panic, they act. Knox worked for 2 straight days, weaving a subtle web of whispers across underground forums and discreet channels frequented by powerful men. Small clues, unanswered questions, all pointing toward one impossible truth. The Sinclair daughter might still be alive, but on the 3rd day, Knox found something that tightened every jaw in the room. "We've got a problem," he said, tension threading his voice. "Crawford hired a private investigator to find out who's digging into the Sinclair case. He's tracing it back." Silence fell. Stone stepped toward the screen, studying the data Knox displayed. "How much time do we have?" Knox calculated quickly. "About 2 weeks before he connects it to Blackwell. His investigator's on the right trail, just missing the final link. After 2 weeks, he'll know. And when he does, he'll prepare. He'll bury every trace, maybe even disappear." "Then we move first," Stone said. 2 weeks. Enough or not, it's all we've got." Just then, Pierce entered, carrying something rare on his face. "Hope, I've got good news. I found a witness." He placed a file on the table. Henry Lawson, 72 years old. 19 years ago, he was the mechanic hired to inspect the Sinclair family car just before the crash. After the accident, he vanished, quit his job, abandoned his home, like a man running from something. Pierce opened the file, revealing a satellite image of a small house stranded in desert emptiness. "I tracked him down, living under a different name in Arizona, out in the middle of nowhere, more than 50 miles from the nearest town. He's been hiding for 19 years, and I'd bet he knows something he's been too afraid to say." Stone nodded and turned to Reese, the quiet one, but among the most dependable. "Reese, you go to Arizona. Find Lawson. Protect him. Convince him to testify. Use whatever method you need, but no force. If he's afraid, give him a reason to be brave." Reese gave a single nod, said nothing, and left the room. Stone faced the glowing map of plans on the screen, the arrows and connections slowly forming a pattern. Then he looked at Ellie, sitting by the window, city lights casting pale streaks across her fragile face. She couldn't see Chicago, but she was listening. The distant hum of traffic, the wind slipping through unseen cracks, the steady, synchronized pulse of 10 hearts in that room, all beating with the same tension. "The trap is set," Stone said, his voice low and steady. "Now we wait for the prey to step into it. And we pray he steps in before he learns who set it." 2 weeks passed as swiftly as a gust of wind. The night of Chicago's annual charity gala for the upper class finally arrived. The Peninsula Hotel shimmered like a palace in the heart of the city, crystal chandeliers blazing above a red carpet that stretched from the entrance into the grand hall. Sleek black limousines lined up one after another, delivering businessmen, politicians, and the most powerful faces in Chicago. Blackwell Holdings was one of the principal sponsors, which meant Stone had every legitimate reason to attend. And tonight, he didn't arrive alone. Ellie stepped out of the car, transformed from the ragged homeless girl of 2 weeks earlier. She wore a fitted black gown that traced her slender frame with quiet pride. Her dark brown hair was brushed smooth, falling softly over her shoulders. Expensive sunglasses concealed her blind eyes, turning her into a woman of mystery rather than an object of pity. Her hand rested lightly on Stone's arm, as though she did this every evening. To those watching, she was Harrison Blackwell's business partner, a poised and formidable woman accompanying one of the wealthiest men in the city. No one could see that beneath the elegance, her heart pounded wildly, and every step she took was carefully measured to keep from stumbling. They entered the grand hall. Stone guided her through the crowd, nodding to familiar faces, exchanging polished pleasantries. Ellie stood silent beside him, her ears working relentlessly, collecting every sound: the laughter of socialites, the delicate clink of champagne glasses, footsteps crossing marble floors. She was waiting for a voice. Then Stone leaned close, his lips near her ear. "Crawford just arrived." 10 o'clock, walking toward us. Ellie's heart seemed to skip. She drew in a steady breath and kept her expression calm. This was the moment she'd waited 19 years for. The moment she would stand within reach of the devil who destroyed her life. She heard the footsteps approaching. Confident, measured steps of a man accustomed to respect and fear. The faint scent of expensive cologne drifted through the air, threaded with Cuban cigar smoke. "Mr. Blackwell," the voice sounded, and Ellie's world froze. Low, smooth, like honey. "It's an honor. I hear your company's expanding quite impressively. Perhaps we should explore cooperation in the future." Ellie heard nothing after that first line. That voice. It cut through 19 years of time and drove straight into her chest like a blade. Suddenly, she wasn't standing in the glittering hall of the peninsula. She was back inside a burning car, gasoline and smoke choking her lungs, flames roaring around her, and that voice, cold and detached, floated outside. "Are you sure no one survived?" Ellie's fingers tightened around Stone's arm, her nails digging through the fabric of his suit into his skin. She trembled uncontrollably. Her breathing fractured into shallow gasps. Her knees began to buckle. Stone felt it instantly. His arm slid around her waist, holding her upright, his face never losing its flawless social smile. "Judge Crawford, a pleasure," Stone said evenly. "My partner isn't feeling well. Perhaps the change in weather. We'll speak later." Without waiting for a reply, Stone guided Ellie out of the crowd, moving swiftly toward a side exit. He signaled jet, and within less than a minute, they were inside the black SUV racing through Chicago's streets. In the car, Ellie collapsed. She shook violently, curling into herself against the leather seat. Tears streamed uncontrollably from her blind eyes, soaking the expensive sunglasses. She tried to speak, but her voice shattered into fragments. "It's him," she whispered, barely more than breath. That voice. 19 years. I've heard it every night in my nightmares. Every night it asks if anyone survived. Every night I hear my mother call my name and then fall silent. She clutched the lapel of Stone's jacket, as if it were the only thing keeping her from falling into an abyss. He killed my parents. He stood there and watched us burn. He made sure no one survived. And for 19 years he's lived like a king while I... She couldn't finish. Sobs overtook her, her entire body shaking in Stone's arms. Stone looked at her, at the small figure breaking apart against his chest. The girl who'd been unshakably strong for weeks was finally releasing 19 years of buried pain, and for the first time in many years, something ignited inside him. It wasn't anger, though he was furious. It wasn't hatred, though he hated Crawford to the bone. It was something far more dangerous, something he'd believed had died long ago in the frozen chambers of his heart. The need to protect. He wanted to protect her. At any cost. "He'll pay," Stone said, his voice low as a curse, as binding as an oath carved into stone. "I swear to you." By the time they returned to the penthouse, Ellie was still trembling. She sat curled into herself on the leather sofa, her legs drawn up, her arms wrapped tightly around her body as if she were trying to keep herself from shattering. The sunglasses were gone, revealing cloudy gray-green eyes swollen and red from tears. The tears continued to slip down her cheeks, and she didn't bother to wipe them away. Stone stood in the middle of the room, helpless in a way he'd never experienced before. He was used to facing enemies, used to giving orders in life-and-death situations, used to controlling everything around him with iron will and iron fists. But standing before a girl unraveling under 19 years of buried pain, he didn't know what to do. He didn't know how to comfort. He didn't know gentle words. He didn't know how to soothe a heart that was still bleeding. In the end, he did the only thing he could think of. He walked over and sat down beside her on the sofa. He didn't speak. He didn't touch her. He simply sat there, present, waiting. Silence stretched between them. Outside the windows, Chicago pulsed with a million lights and the distant wail of traffic. But inside the penthouse, time seemed to hold its breath. Then Ellie spoke, her voice raw from too much crying. 19 years. She said it as though she were speaking to herself. "I thought I'd forgotten. I thought the memory had faded with time. I tried to bury it. I tried to keep living. I tried to focus on surviving each day." She drew in a shaky breath, but his voice, it never left. It was there every night in my darkness. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard him. Every time I tried to sleep, he was there, asking if anyone survived. 19 years, and it's still as clear as that night. Stone listened in silence. It wasn't something he often did for anyone. He was a man who issued commands, not one who listened. A man who solved problems, not one who sat still while someone poured out their grief. But with Ellie, he understood that she didn't need him to fix anything in that moment. She just needed someone to be there, to hear her, to remind her she wasn't alone anymore. Ellie turned her face toward him, her blind eyes seeming to search for something beyond sight. Why are you doing all this? Truly? You're a crime lord. You have your own empire, your own wars. Why do you care about a blind homeless girl like me? Stone didn't answer right away. He looked out at the city stretched beneath the glass. After a long while, he spoke, his voice lower than usual, as if he were opening a door he'd kept locked for years. Because I know that feeling. Losing everything as a kid. Having no one stand for you. He paused and took a steady breath. My father was killed when I was 12. A hit. They shot him right in front of me. His voice didn't break, but Ellie could hear the pain threaded deep beneath the words. My mother didn't survive it. She collapsed inside herself, then illness took her. She died when I was 16. I built everything from nothing. Alone. No one saved me. No one stood for me. He turned toward her, though she couldn't see it. But I can. I can make sure you're not alone the way I was. Ellie didn't speak. She reached out slowly, feeling her way through the familiar darkness, until her fingers brushed the back of his hand. She placed her small hand over his, gently, as if afraid he might pull away. It was the first time in years she'd chosen to touch someone, the first time she'd trusted enough to reach out. Stone looked down at her hand resting on his. Thin, fragile, warm. He didn't pull away, and in the quiet penthouse above the restless city, two people once abandoned by the world sat side by side, needing no more words. 3 days later, Reese returned from Arizona. He didn't come alone. Stepping out of the black SUV beside him was a 72-year-old man, hair white as snow, frame thin and unsteady, his hands trembling without pause. Yet when he lifted his head, his eyes were bright and clear, the eyes of someone who had carried a secret too long and was finally ready to lay it down. Henry Lawson, a living witness to what happened 19 years ago. In the penthouse conference room, everyone was present. Stone sat at the head of the table, Pierce and Knox on either side, Jet and Tate stationed by the door. Ellie sat quietly in the corner, listening as she always did. Lawson was offered a seat. A glass of water rested before him, untouched, his shaking hands laced together as if holding onto the last threads of courage he possessed. 19 years ago, he began, his voice rough with age and fear buried too long. I was a mechanic at a garage on the north side of Chicago. One day I got a call to inspect the Sinclair family car, a luxury sedan. He paused, swallowing hard. When I arrived, a man was already there, polite, well-dressed, smooth in the way he spoke. Later I learned his name was Franklin Crawford. His voice trembled more deeply. He handed me $50,000 in cash. Told me I only had to do one simple thing. Inspect the car and report that everything was normal. Don't touch the brakes. Don't ask questions. Lawson closed his eyes, as if seeing that day again. I saw it. The brake lines had been cut. Not damaged. Cut. Deliberately. That car was a death trap. He opened his eyes and looked straight at Stone. I knew what I was doing. I knew if I stayed silent, someone would die. But $50,000. For a mechanic like me back then, it was a fortune. And Crawford, he didn't threaten me with words. He just looked at me, and I knew if I refused, I wouldn't live to see the next sunrise. The room sank into heavy silence. Lawson continued. After the accident, I was terrified out of my mind. I quit my job, abandoned my home, ran to Arizona. For 19 years, I lived like a ghost, afraid to contact anyone from my past. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out an old USB drive and a stack of yellowed papers. But I kept these. A recording of my conversation with Crawford. Transfer receipts. I held on to them because I knew someday someone would need them to demand justice. Knox immediately plugged the USB into his laptop. Minutes later, he looked up, eyes lit with urgency. There's more. I've been tracing the Sinclair estate money for 19 years. Crawford laundered it through dozens of shell companies, and guess where it ends up? He turned the screen toward the room. Bruno Caruso. That money is what allowed Caruso to grow from a small-time crew into the empire he runs now. The ambush against us wasn't random. Crawford gave the order. Caruso executed it. They're partners. The conference room door opened. A woman stepped inside, around 45 years old, hair cut short and sharp, eyes as precise as blades. Catherine Hayes, one of the finest attorneys in Chicago, and a woman with her own score to settle. 10 years earlier, Crawford had used false accusations to nearly destroy her career and push her into prison. Catherine studied the stack of files, flipping through documents, listening to the recording, examining the receipts. Then her gaze moved to Ellie, sitting quietly in the corner, blind eyes facing a place no one else could see. "There's enough here to indict him," Catherine said, her voice firm as steel. "But Crawford is a federal judge. He has power, connections, an entire network protecting him. He won't sit quietly while we drag him down. This will be a war." Ellie slowly lifted her head toward Catherine's voice. Her tone was calm, but beneath it burned a flame that had smoldered for 19 years. "I've waited 19 years. I'm ready." Crawford wasn't a fool. When rumors about Eleanor Sinclair being alive began to circulate, when his private investigator reported that someone was digging into the past, he understood he was being cornered. And a beast driven into a corner is at its most dangerous. He called Bruno Caruso. "End this," he ordered, his voice cold as ice. "Tonight, before it's too late." That night, the estate outside the city lay quiet among sparse woods about 40 minutes from downtown Chicago. It was the safe house where Stone had moved Ellie after the encounter with Crawford, a place equipped with modern security and isolation. Tate and Jet rotated watch, while Ellie rested in an upstairs bedroom. Stone wasn't there. He was meeting Catherine Hayes at her downtown office, preparing filings for the coming trial. He didn't believe Crawford would move that quickly. That was his mistake. At 11:43 that night, the power in the house died without warning. Darkness swallowed every corner like a heavy black curtain. Jet drew his weapon instantly, eyes sweeping the windows. Tate sprinted up the stairs toward Ellie's room. "Ellie," Tate called as he burst inside. "With me, now." But Ellie was already standing in the middle of the room, her head tilted slightly, listening. Darkness didn't frighten her. Darkness was her territory. "Quiet," she whispered, raising a hand to stop him. She stood perfectly still, every sense sharpened. Footsteps, soft, deliberate, but not soft enough to escape her ears. "Two at the front door," she said calmly, trying the lock. 3 circling the back, already on the patio. And 1. She lifted her face as if looking through the ceiling. 1 on the roof, east side, moving toward the second-floor window. Tate stared at her, stunned. The blind girl was directing the battlefield like a commander. "Jet," Tate called into the radio. 2 front, 3 rear, 1 roof. Jet answered with a low confirmation. Then everything shattered at once. The front door splintered inward. Glass broke at the back. Jet fired, gunshots cracking in violent reply. Tate pulled Ellie into the corner, shielding her with his body. 3 from the back entering the kitchen, Ellie murmured, her ears still working relentlessly. "One's hit, slowing down. The other 2 split, 1 heading for the stairs, 1 moving through the living room." Tate signaled for silence, then stepped into the hallway, weapon trained on the staircase. A dark figure appeared at the landing. Tate fired first. The attacker dropped, but in the same instant, a bullet tore through Tate's shoulder from the direction of the window. He collapsed, teeth clenched against the pane. "Tate." Ellie moved toward the sound of him falling. She dropped to her knees, hands searching until they found the wound. Blood, warm and slick against her fingers. She didn't panic. 9 years on the streets had taught her how to face blood and pain. She tore fabric from her own shirt and wrapped it tight around Tate's shoulder to slow the bleeding. Jet appeared in the doorway, sweat and streaks of blood across his face. "It's done. 6 targets, 6 down. We move now." They carried Tate to a backup vehicle in the garage. Ellie sat in the back, holding him steady, her hand pressing firmly against the wound to keep the blood from flowing. 20 minutes later, Stone's convoy roared in. He was out of the car before it fully stopped, striding toward the SUV where Jet stood waiting. The sight before him was chaos. Windows blown out, bullet scars across the walls, and inside the vehicle, Tate lying still with a hastily bound shoulder, Ellie beside him, her small hands stained with his blood. yet her face was composed. No hysteria, no fear, only focus, only resolve. Stone stepped closer and looked at her. She hadn't survived 9 years on the street by luck. She had survived because she was stronger than anyone he'd ever known. You saved them. Again, he said, something new in his voice, a respect he rarely gave. Ellie lifted her face toward him, her blind eyes weary but steady. I just did what I could. The next 2 weeks passed in a tension that never quite loosened its grip. Each day, Ellie sat in the conference room with Catherine Hayes, rehearsing every question, every answer, every steady breath she'd need when Crawford's defense tore into her on the stand. Catherine didn't soften the blows. She played the opposing counsel with ruthless precision, her questions sharp as razors, deliberately provocative, designed to rattle Ellie's composure. They'll attack your credibility, Catherine said one afternoon after an especially brutal mock examination. You're blind. You were homeless. You have no physical evidence beyond a memory of a voice from 19 years ago. They'll try to paint you as unstable, as desperate, as someone inventing a story to reclaim a fortune. They won't hold back. Ellie nodded slowly, her face composed. I understand. But beneath the table, her hands were clenched tight enough to ache. She understood. That didn't mean she wasn't afraid. The night before the trial, Ellie couldn't sleep. She stood alone on the penthouse balcony, letting the cold breath of December wind move through her hair and across her skin. Chicago stretched below like a sea of light, though to her it was only distant sound. Car horns, wind threading between towers, the steady hum of a city that would continue no matter what tomorrow brought. She heard familiar footsteps behind her. Heavy, certain, yet softened with care. Stone. He stepped beside her without speaking. He simply stood there, present, as if he understood that silence sometimes carried more weight than words. After a long while, Ellie spoke, her voice so quiet the wind nearly stole it. I'm afraid. Stone turned toward her, though she couldn't see it. Of what? Ellie drew in a deep breath of cold air. Of standing in front of him, of hearing his voice again, of that night swallowing me whole in the middle of the courtroom. She paused, her voice trembling faintly. And I'm afraid no one will believe me. Afraid they'll look at me and see a blind, unstable girl making up a story. Afraid 19 years of waiting will end in laughter. Stone didn't answer at once. He looked out over the skyline where the towers stood like silent guardians. Then he faced her again, his voice low and steady. I believe you. 3 simple words, but to Ellie they weighed more than any promise she'd ever heard. My men believe you, he continued. Tate almost died protecting you, and he doesn't regret it. Jet, Knox, Pierce, Reese, they all believe you, and tomorrow the world will believe you. He reached out and touched her hand gently. The second time he'd reached for someone not to command or control, but simply to connect. His hand was warm, roughened by a life carved in hardship, yet steady. No matter what happens, he said, his voice softer than she'd ever heard it. I'll be right behind you, not because you need protecting, because that's where I choose to stand. Ellie smiled, small but genuine. I know. They stood there, shoulders nearly touching, without speaking further. In the east, the sky shifted from black to gray, then to a pale wash of pink as dawn slowly rose. Chicago was waking, and with it, a new day was coming. Tomorrow she would face the devil who destroyed her life, but this time she wouldn't be alone. The federal courthouse in Chicago had never seen a crowd like this. From early morning, reporters from every major and minor outlet lined the steps outside, cameras and microphones aimed at the main doors like weapons waiting for their target. Curious citizens pressed together, fighting for a seat inside the courtroom to witness what many were already calling historic. A federal judge accused of murder and embezzlement. For 2 weeks, the story had spread like wildfire. The blind girl who survived a crash 19 years ago. The $80 million that vanished. The conspiracy between a judge and a mafia empire. It had all the elements of a Hollywood film, except this was real. Ellie entered the courthouse, her white cane tapping a steady rhythm against polished stone. She wore a simple but elegant black suit, her hair pulled neatly back, her face composed and unreadable. The dark sunglasses were gone, replaced by clear lenses that revealed her cloudy gray-green eyes to the world. She wasn't hiding anymore. She wasn't ashamed of her blindness. It was part of her, and today it would help deliver justice. Catherine Hayes walked beside her, carrying a thick case file. Behind them, Stone and the members of the syndicate took their seats in the second row directly behind Ellie, exactly as he had promised. Jet to the left, Pierce to the right, Knox and Tate just behind them. Tate's shoulder was still bandaged, but he'd insisted on coming. Reese stood near the door, eyes scanning the crowd with cold vigilance. Then Crawford appeared. He entered through a side door, flanked by two of the most expensive defense attorneys in Chicago. He wore a perfectly tailored gray three-piece suit, silver hair brushed immaculately, and on his lips rested the confident smile of a man accustomed to respect and fear. He surveyed the courtroom as if it were his stage. His gaze slid over Ellie, and for a fraction of a second, his mouth curved with quiet contempt. A blind, former homeless girl daring to challenge a federal judge. Absurd. Judge Walter Pemberton, assigned to preside, entered and struck the gavel. The trial began. The first witness called was Henry Lawson. The 72-year-old man rose from the gallery and made his slow way to the stand. His hands trembled, but when he took his seat and looked directly at the jury, his voice steadied like steel. 19 years ago, he began, I was hired to inspect the Sinclair family car. A man I later learned was Franklin Crawford paid me $50,000 to report that the vehicle was fine. But it wasn't fine. The brakes had been cut. He presented the evidence. The recording of his conversation with Crawford, the transfer receipts, all preserved for 19 years. Crawford's defense attorney stood, his tone edged with disdain. Mr. Lawson, you admit you accepted a bribe. You were complicit in this crime. Why should this jury believe a man who took money to remain silent? Lawson met his gaze without flinching. Because I've lived with that guilt for 19 years. Every night, I see that fire. Every morning I wake up with the face of an 8-year-old child I believe died because of my cowardice. His voice trembled, but his eyes didn't waver. I don't want to die carrying that. I want to see justice, even if it's only once in my lifetime. The courtroom fell silent. The jurors exchanged solemn looks. Catherine rose. The prosecution calls Eleanor Sinclair. Ellie stood. She took her white cane and walked toward the witness stand, slow and steady. Each step measured, precise, unhesitating. She had counted the distance from her seat to the stand the moment she entered the courtroom. 23 steps. She placed her hand on the Bible, swore to tell the truth, and sat. Her face remained calm, though her heart thundered. From the defense table, Crawford stared at her, and for the first time in 19 years, the confident smile vanished from his lips. He recognized her. Those gray-green eyes, the shape of her face. The 8-year-old girl he believed had burned in that car was now sitting across from him, ready to bury him. Crawford's defense attorney rose slowly and fastened the button of his suit jacket with deliberate care, the practiced confidence of a man who had won hundreds of cases, settling over him like a tailored coat. His name was Richard Mercer, known in legal circles as the witness destroyer for his talent in dismantling the credibility of anyone bold enough to testify against his clients. He approached Ellie and regarded her the way a hunter studies prey. Miss Sinclair, he began, his tone smooth, almost pleasant, though something poisonous coiled beneath it. You've been blind since you were 8 years old, correct? Ellie answered evenly. Correct. And you expect this honorable jury to believe that you can identify a voice from 19 years ago? Yes. Mercer turned toward the jury, lifting both hands in theatrical disbelief. Ladies and gentlemen, this young woman cannot see my client. She has no DNA evidence, no physical proof, no video, no photographs. He faced Ellie again, a thin smile curling at the edge of his mouth. You have only your ears? A soft scoff escaped him, and a few restrained chuckles rose from the defense table. 19 years ago, you were an 8-year-old child in a horrific accident. You suffered blindness and severe psychological trauma. Your memory cannot possibly be reliable. This may be nothing more than a desperate former homeless woman attempting to seize $80 million with a fabricated story. Mercer stepped closer, his voice sharpening. Admit it, Miss Sinclair. You cannot identify anyone by voice alone. You're lying. You're attempting to deceive this court. Ellie sat motionless. She could feel the weight of every gaze pressing in on her, could hear the faint ripple of doubt whispering across the courtroom. For a moment, she appeared to falter. Her shoulders dipped slightly, her chin lowered. Mercer's smile deepened in quiet triumph. Then Ellie lifted her head. Counselor, she said, her voice so calm that the entire courtroom stilled. You're wearing hard-soled leather shoes, size 10, Ferragamo if I'm not mistaken based on the distinctive heel strike. The left heel is worn approximately 2 millimeters more than the right, suggesting you lean slightly to the left when you walk, possibly compensating for an old injury to your right hip. Mercer froze, the smile on his face stiffening into disbelief. Ellie continued, her tone steady, almost clinical. In the past 30 seconds, you've tapped your pen against the table 7 times. That indicates nervousness. And your heart is beating at approximately 95 beats per minute, significantly higher than the resting rate of a healthy adult. She tilted her head slightly, listening. You aren't as confident as you're trying to appear, counselor. The courtroom fell into absolute silence. Not a whisper, not a breath. Mercer stood rigid, mouth slightly open, words failing him. Then Ellie turned her face toward the defense table, aligning herself directly with Crawford's position, as if she could see him through her permanent darkness. 19 years ago, she said, her voice trembling now not with fear but with emotion long restrained. I was trapped inside a burning car. My parents were dead. I couldn't see anything, but I heard everything. The fire, the metal twisting, and a voice outside the vehicle. She drew in a slow breath. That voice asked, "Are you sure no one survived?" The speaker dragged the S slightly, emphasized the K, and had a habit of inhaling before delivering important sentences. She paused, letting the silence stretch and tighten around the room. That is precisely the voice of the man seated at the defense table, Crawford snapped. He surged to his feet, face flushed with fury, and shouted, "You have no proof. You're just a crazy blind woman trying to steal my money." And in that instant, just before he shouted, he inhaled. The S in survived lengthened unnaturally. The K sounds in crazy, and steel cut sharply through the air. His voice rang across the courtroom, and everyone heard it. Exactly as Ellie had described. The jurors stared at one another, eyes wide. Judge Pemberton struck the gavel hard. "Order. The defendant will sit down immediately." Crawford's face drained of color. He understood what had just happened. He had exposed himself before the entire jury, before the hundreds in the gallery, before the millions watching on live broadcast. He sank back into his chair, pale as bone. The courtroom remained utterly still. Ellie sat composed on the witness stand, her blind eyes facing forward, needing no sight to know what had unfolded. A faint smile touched her lips, the smile of someone who had waited 19 years for this moment. 19 years. At last, she had won. The jury left the courtroom to deliberate. 12 men and women would decide the fate of Franklin Crawford and, with it, determine whether 19 years of Ellie's suffering would finally be answered. In cases this complex, deliberations often stretch across several days. This time, it took only 3 hours. While they waited, Ellie sat in the witness room without moving. She didn't speak. She didn't shift. She simply sat with her hands clenched tightly in her lap, her knuckles white from the pressure. She had done everything she could. She had faced the devil. She had stepped through her fear. She had laid the truth bare before the world. Now all that remained was waiting. Stone sat beside her in silence. He didn't offer hollow reassurance. He didn't promise a favorable outcome. He was simply there, steady and present, so she wouldn't feel alone. Sometimes silence carries more weight than words ever could. Then the courtroom doors opened. The jury has reached a verdict. Ellie rose to her feet, her legs trembling faintly. Stone's hand touched her elbow lightly, guiding her back into the courtroom. Her cane tapped against the floor, but this time each step felt heavy as lead. The courtroom was even more crowded than it had been that morning. News of the dramatic confrontation had spread, and everyone wanted to witness the conclusion. Cameras from major networks were fixed on the bench. The world was watching. Crawford sat at the defense table, his face drained of color. The arrogance he'd worn earlier had vanished. In its place was the look of a man who could see the end approaching. Judge Pemberton struck the gavel. The jury has reached a unanimous verdict. Foreperson, please read the decision. A middle-aged man stood from the jury box, a sheet of paper trembling slightly in his hand. The courtroom held its breath. On the charge of first-degree murder in the deaths of Robert and Margaret Sinclair, guilty. A ripple broke through the room before the gavel demanded order. The foreperson continued. On the charge of conspiracy to commit murder, guilty. On the charge of fraud and embezzlement, guilty. On the charge of corruption and abuse of power, guilty. Each word fell like a hammer against Crawford's chest. He collapsed forward onto the table, his shoulders shaking. For 19 years he had lived like a king, respected and feared. For 19 years he had slept in comfort, purchased with the blood of an innocent family. And now it was over. Court officers moved in and fastened cuffs around his wrists. Crawford lunged to his feet, struggling, shouting, "I'll appeal. This is a conspiracy. You can't do this to me. I am a federal judge." No one listened. He was led away. The face that once commanded authority twisted now with desperation and hatred. The courtroom doors closed behind him, and Franklin Crawford disappeared from sunlight, perhaps for the last time in his life. Outside the courthouse, the press swarmed. Flashbulbs exploded in rapid bursts. Reporters jostled for statements, but Ellie walked past them without a word. She stopped at a quiet corner along the side of the building where the noise became distant and hollow. She stood facing a brick wall she could not see, and the tears came. She didn't smile. She didn't celebrate. She didn't raise a triumphant fist the way they do in movies. She simply stood there and let the tears fall silently down her face. Stone found her there. He stepped beside her and said nothing. "Are you all right?" he finally asked. Ellie was quiet for a long time. When she spoke, her voice was soft and fractured. "I thought I would feel happy. For 19 years I dreamed of this moment. I thought justice would fill the emptiness. I thought once he was punished, the pain would disappear." She turned her face toward him, blind eyes wet with tears. "But I feel empty. My parents still aren't coming back. I still can't see their faces one last time. I'm still that blind, orphaned child." Stone didn't answer. There was nothing to say. No sentence could soothe 19 years of grief. No verdict could bring her parents home. He simply stood beside her, their shoulders nearly touching, letting her know she wasn't alone. Justice had come after 19 long years. Crawford would die in prison. The Sinclair fortune would be restored. But some things cannot be bought back with money, cannot be restored by any court. Her parents were gone forever. And Ellie would have to learn how to live with that space inside her, now and always. 1 week after the trial, Ellie sat in Catherine Hayes' office with a pen in her hand and a thick stack of legal documents spread before her. She couldn't see the lines on the page, but Catherine had read every clause aloud, and now Ellie signed her name on the final sheet. The signature trembled slightly, yet it was clear and deliberate. "Eleanor Sinclair." "It's done," Catherine said, her voice carrying the quiet satisfaction of someone who had finished something monumental. "You're officially recognized as the sole lawful heir to the Sinclair estate. $80 million, plus 19 years of accrued interest, plus the damages awarded in the civil suit. $80 million. The number echoed in Ellie's mind like something distant and hollow. 19 years ago, she had been the daughter of a wealthy family. Then she became a blind orphan abandoned in the system. Then she became homeless, sleeping in the frozen alleys of Chicago, and now she was a millionaire. Yet her thoughts weren't anchored in that office. They were somewhere else entirely, resting on a decision she had already made. "You're certain about this?" Catherine asked gently, as if reading the direction of her silence. Ellie nodded. "I've researched it carefully. The clinic in Switzerland has the most advanced technology available. They believe my condition may be partially reversible. Not perfect vision, but enough that I could see." Her voice softened. "I want to see. For the first time in 19 years. I have hope, and I want to follow it. 6 months. 6 months of treatment and recovery in Switzerland. 6 months away from Chicago, away from familiar streets, and from the people who had become her family." O'Hare Airport buzzed as it always did. Ellie stood before the security checkpoint, with her white cane in hand and a small suitcase at her side. She didn't need much luggage, because she had never owned much to carry. Stone stood facing her, and she felt his presence the way one feels warmth from the sun. Behind him, at a respectful distance, Tate, Jet, and Knox raised their hands in farewell. She couldn't see them, but she heard Tate call out, "You better come back. Who's going to save our lives if you don't?" She smiled and waved toward their voices. Stone handed her a compact phone. "Only 5 people in the world have this number," he said, his voice lower than usual. "Anytime you need me, no matter the hour, no matter where you are, call. I'll be there." Ellie took the phone, her fingers brushing his hand, trembling faintly at the contact. She slipped it into her coat pocket, close to her heart. She began to turn toward the security line, ready to disappear into the crowd. But she stopped. There was one thing she needed to do before leaving. She turned back and stepped closer to Stone, closer still, until she could hear the steady rhythm of his heartbeat, just a little faster than usual. Then she lifted her hand and touched his face. Stone went utterly still. Her fingers moved slowly across his features, as if sketching him into memory. "I want to know what you look like," she whispered. "Your jaw is sharp, strong, high cheekbones." Her fingers traced upward and found the scar running from the corner of his left eye down along his cheek. "There's a scar here. You've endured pain." She paused at his eyes, feeling the curve of his brow and the thickness of his lashes. "Your eyes, I imagine they're cold when you look at an enemy. But I think they can be warm, too." She withdrew her hand and smiled, a genuine light spreading across her face. "Thank you, for everything. For believing me when no one else did. For standing beside me when I had no one. For giving me a family." Stone swallowed against the tightness in his throat. When he spoke, his voice was rough. "You'll come back, won't you?" Ellie nodded. Her blind eyes turned toward him as though she could see straight into the deepest part of him. "I promise." She turned and walked toward security, her white cane tapping softly against polished stone. She handed over her ticket and passport, passed through the scanner, and continued forward. She didn't look back, but Stone knew she was smiling. He remained where he stood until her small figure disappeared completely into the flow of travelers. His cheek still held the warmth of her touch, and inside his chest, something beat that he had believed long dead. Something buried the day his father was killed, the day his mother faded away. 6 months later, Switzerland. The recovery suite at the private Winter's Eye Institute rested along the slope of the Alps, where the air was so pure and still, it felt as if one could hear the snow falling. Ellie lay propped against soft white pillows, her eyes still wrapped in clean white bandages. 6 months. 6 months of painful surgeries, of long weeks suspended in darkness, of sleepless nights suspended between hope and terror. And today, everything would be answered. Dr. Samuel Winters stood beside her bed, gloved hands prepared. He was one of the most respected ophthalmologists in the world, a man who had turned away countless VIP patients to devote himself to Ellie's case, calling it the most fascinating challenge of his career. "Are you ready?" he asked, his voice gentle yet solemn. Ellie nodded, unable to trust her voice. Her heart pounded so hard she could hear it echo in her ears. 19 years. 19 years of living in darkness. 19 years of imagining colors, shapes, faces, without ever knowing whether her memory was true. And now, in a matter of seconds, she might see, or she might remain in darkness forever. Dr. Winters began removing the bandages, layer by careful layer. Light seeped in slowly, at first only a faint haze, then stronger still. Ellie blinked. Pain flared, too bright. She shut her eyes instinctively as tears spilled from overstimulation. Slowly, Dr. Winters murmured, "Open them gradually. Let them adjust." Ellie obeyed. She opened her eyes a fraction at a time. At first, everything was only brightness without shape. Then, like a painting slowly revealing itself stroke by stroke, the world began to take form. White. That was the first thing she truly saw. The white of the walls, the white of the sheets, the white of the doctor's coat. Then blue. The vast, endless blue of the sky beyond the window. And yellow. The warm gold of sunlight spilling through glass, resting on her skin like a gentle blanket. Color. The thing she had lost for 19 long years. The thing she had held only in memory, unsure if she remembered it correctly. Now it was here, everywhere, filling her vision. Tears streamed down her cheeks, not from pain but from overwhelm. Too much emotion. Too much beauty. Too much that had been taken and was now being returned. "It's a success, Doctor," Winters said, his own voice thick despite thousands of surgeries behind him. "Your vision will continue improving over the coming weeks. It won't be perfect, not 100%, but it will be enough for you to see the world." He handed her a small mirror. "Would you like to look?" Ellie took it with trembling hands and lifted it slowly. She saw herself for the first time in 19 years. A 27-year-old woman stared back. High cheekbones, a refined jaw, gray-green eyes now clear rather than clouded, dark brown hair brushing her shoulders, pale skin already warming with color. I look like my mother, she whispered, her voice breaking. The memory of her mother's gentle face rushed back, a face she had fought to preserve in her mind for 19 years. Now, in the mirror, she saw her mother looking back at her. She lowered the mirror and turned toward the window. The sky stretched wide and blue. The Alps shimmered with white snow in the distance. The sun burned bright and warm. The world was more beautiful than anything she had imagined. But there was one thing she wanted to see more than all of it. She reached for the small phone Stone had given her at the airport 6 months earlier. She didn't need to look to know where the call button was. She had memorized every key long ago. But now she wanted to see it, and she wanted to see him. Book a flight to Chicago, she told the assistant standing near the door, the earliest one available. Chicago, 1 week later. The Blackwell Holdings Tower rose in the heart of the city, 40 stories of glass and steel catching the late afternoon sun. Ellie stepped into the lobby, and for the first time in her life, she saw this place. The black and white marble floor gleamed like a polished mirror. Towering walls of glass opened onto the vast skyline of Chicago, skyscrapers standing in formation like silent giants. Dark, elegant furnishings filled the space. Black leather chairs, solid oak tables, crystal chandeliers scattering light in quiet brilliance. She smiled. 6 months earlier, when she had first arrived here, she had seen all of it with her ears. She had heard the echo of the vast open space, felt the cool marble beneath her shoes, breathed in the scent of leather and polished wood. She had painted a picture of this place in her mind. And now, seeing it with her eyes, she realized that picture had been almost perfectly true. She no longer carried a white cane. She didn't need it. Her vision wasn't flawless, but it was steady enough for her to walk forward with confidence, unassisted. She stepped into the elevator, pressed the button for the 40th floor, and felt her body lifted skyward. When the doors opened, she entered the highest level of the building. Stone's private office. The room stretched wide, glass walls framing 3 sides, overlooking Chicago like a king surveying his kingdom. And there, standing before the largest pane of glass, his back to her, was Stone. Broad shoulders, tall frame, posture straight as a tower, the stance of a man accustomed to carrying the weight of the world without ever bending his knees. Exactly as she had imagined during those 6 long months. I knew it was you by your footsteps, Stone said without turning. His voice remained deep and steady, just as she remembered. But something's different. You're not using a cane. Ellie smiled, though he couldn't yet see it. Do you want to see what's different? Stone turned around, and the world stopped. His steel gray eyes widened when he saw her, not because she was more beautiful or dressed more elegantly, but because of her eyes. The gray-green haze was gone. They were clear now, like the sky after a storm, bright as moonlight on still water, and they were looking straight at him, not in his direction as before, but truly seeing him. Stone stood motionless, unable to speak. His lips parted slightly, but no words came. He had faced enemies without hesitation, men with guns and power and hatred, yet now he stood silent before one woman. Ellie stepped closer, slowly, her gaze never leaving him. She studied him from head to toe as if committing every detail to memory, comparing reality to the portrait she had carried in her mind. Black hair, she said softly. A few strands of silver at your temples. More than I imagined. A square jaw, sharp as if carved from stone. The scar from the corner of your left eye down to your cheek, exactly where I felt it at the airport. She stopped in front of him, close enough to feel his warmth. Gray eyes, like steel, but not as cold as steel. She looked deep into his eyes, and her smile widened. You look exactly like I imagined. Every night in Switzerland I tried to picture your face. And here you are, exactly that. Only... Stone found his voice, though it came out rough, as if unused for days. Only what? Ellie tilted her head, her clear eyes glinting with playful light. You look warmer than I thought. Your voice is cold. Your footsteps are heavy. Your heartbeat steady as a machine. I thought you would look like an ice sculpture. She lifted her hand, this time not to feel but to see, touching his cheek lightly while watching the movement with her own eyes. But your eyes aren't cold. They're warm, they're sad, they're lonely. She smiled gently. Like mine. Stone laughed. The sound rose from deep in his chest and filled the vast office. It was a rare sound. One Pierce or Jet wouldn't have believed if they had heard it. The laughter of a man who had just found something he thought he had lost forever. They stood there, facing one another, no more words needed. Beyond the glass, Chicago stretched wide and alive, but neither of them looked outside. After 19 years of darkness, Ellie had finally seen the light, and in that light, she saw him, the man who had stood beside her when the rest of the world turned away. 1 month later, the large conference room on the 40th floor of Blackwell Holdings was filled with familiar faces. Stone sat at the head of the table as he always did, Pierce at his right, Jet at his left. Knox typed steadily on his laptop. Tate lounged back with his usual careless ease, and Reese stood near the door, leaning against the wall, silent as a shadow. They were all there, and they were all looking at Ellie. She stood at the opposite end of the table, facing Stone. For the first time since they had met, she was the one who had called the meeting. She wore a tailored gray suit, her hair pulled neatly back, and her clear eyes, bright and confident now, met each man's gaze without hesitation. "I have an important announcement," she began, her voice steady. First, she placed a thick folder on the table and slid it toward Stone. "This building, Blackwell Holdings has leased it for 15 years. As of today, you don't have to lease it anymore." Stone frowned and opened the folder. His eyes widened as he read the documents inside. "I purchased the building," Ellie said quietly, yet with a certainty that left no room for argument, "and transferred permanent ownership to you, to the Blackwell Syndicate." The room fell silent. Pierce looked at Stone. Stone looked at Ellie. Tate stared with his mouth slightly open, as if he'd forgotten how to breathe. Stone rose slowly and shook his head. "Ellie, I can't accept this. It's too much. We didn't help you for money or property. We did it because it was the right thing," Ellie finished, stepping closer. "I know, and that's exactly why I'm doing this. You saved my life. You gave me a family when I had no one. You believed me when the world thought I was insane. This is my way of giving back." She held his gaze firmly. "No negotiation. The papers are signed. This building is yours. From now on, and forever." Stone stood there, looking at her, and for perhaps the first time in his life, the most powerful man in Chicago's underworld had no words. "Second," Ellie continued, turning to face everyone in the room, "I've established the Sinclair Foundation, a charitable organization for orphans and people with disabilities." She paused and drew a breath. "Its headquarters will be here in Chicago. We'll provide safe housing, free education, legal assistance, and most importantly, we'll make sure abandoned children know they aren't invisible." Her voice trembled slightly as she went on. "I was that child, 8 years old, blind, orphaned, sent into a system and forgotten. No one saw me. No one heard me. I survived 9 years on the streets like a ghost." She lifted her chin. "I will make sure no child endures what I did." Then she looked at each of them in turn, from Pierce to Jet, from Knox to Tate, from Reese to Stone. "But I can't do it alone. I need partners, protectors for the vulnerable, men who aren't afraid of the dark." She smiled, her eyes shining. "I need my family." Tate was the first to move. He stood up with a wide grin. "You've got me. Wherever you go, I go." Jet nodded slowly, his deep voice warm. "Lily will be proud to know we're helping kids like you once helped her." "I'm in." Knox raised a hand without looking up from his screen. "I'll build the best security system the Foundation's ever seen. Free of charge." Reese said nothing, only gave a single nod, but from him that was a speech in itself. Pierce glanced at Stone, waiting for the final word. Stone looked at Ellie, then nodded once. Pierce smiled and turned back to her. "We're here, all of us." That night, after the others had left, Ellie and Stone stood on the rooftop of the building. Chicago stretched beneath them like a carpet of light, millions of glowing windows scattered like fallen stars. The night wind moved gently around them, carrying the scent of the city, a scent Ellie had known for years while sleeping in its alleys. "I used to think the darkness was my enemy," Ellie said softly. "For 19 years I lived in it. I feared it. I hated it. I thought if I could just see again, everything would be better. I'd be happier." She turned toward him, her eyes reflecting the city lights. "But it was in the darkness that I found you. Found my family. Found a reason to live." Stone didn't answer. He simply stood beside her, shoulder brushing shoulder, looking out across the skyline. No grand declarations, no dramatic promises, just standing there together in the Chicago night, and in every night that would follow. Two lonely souls who had once wandered through darkness alone had finally found one another. Not a lightning strike romance from a film. Not fiery vows whispered beneath the stars. Just presence. Just being here, together. And knowing that even if the world turned its back, even if darkness returned, they would never be alone again. That is the story of Eleanor Sinclair and Harrison Stone. A story of loss and reclamation. Of darkness and light. Of the abandoned finding each other in a cold world. It reminds us that sometimes the ones the world calls weakest are the strongest of all. That kindness can rise from the most unexpected places. And that family isn't always defined by blood, but by those who choose to stand beside you when everyone else walks away. If this story touched your heart, please press the like button and share it so others can hear it too. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you won't miss our daily stories. How did this story make you feel? Have you ever met someone like Ellie or Stone in your own life? Share your thoughts and experiences in the comments below. We always want to hear the stories that come from the deepest places in your heart. Thank you for spending your time with us today. We wish you good health, peace, and quiet happiness in every day ahead. Goodbye, and we'll see you in the next video.